When the veil first lifts and you realize that a force, be it person, ideology, or ancestral echo, once governed the rhythm of your life, know this: you have only crossed the threshold. The door creaks open, but the room within is vast and echoing, strewn with forgotten relics and whispered commandments etched into stone. Awareness is not yet freedom. It is a flicker of light, fragile, uncertain, dancing along the cold walls of a cathedral built not by your own hands, but by those who claim dominion over your spirit. The mind may name them teacher, lover, parent, preacher, but the soul does not speak in names. It speaks in symbols. It remembers in flame and feather, in wound and echo. Before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe. The more you engage and stay with the content, the more YouTube shares these timeless insights with others. By doing so, you're not only helping this channel grow, but also spreading Carl Jung's transformative wisdom to those seeking meaning and inner truth. Let's dive into the depth of the psyche together. We often confuse that first breath of clarity for a resurrection. But the soul is not so easily exhumed. Long after the gatekeeper is gone, their throne remains in the mind. And so we bow not to the memory, but to the mechanism. A ghost of command still animates our reactions. The fear of pleasure, the hesitation before speaking, the untraceable guilt upon waking, these are not remnants of love, but residues of control. A chorus of disembodied voices still fills the great hall of the psyche. Who taught you to doubt the golden wellspring of your own knowing? Who told you softness was sin, tears were dangerous, or desire unholy? We must understand it is not the presence of the oppressor that sustains the bondage, but the impression they've left carved into the subconscious like a sigil. Their touch became mythology. Their disapproval became scripture. Their silence became doctrine. And here the symbolic nature of the psyche unfurls. The unconscious does not record experience as a sequence of events. It records it as dream and sensation, as archetypal imprint. Your tyrant may no longer be flesh, but they walk the corridors of your interior world, robed as a king, as a god, as a lawgiver. And if you do not name them, they rule unchallenged. We call this psychic entity a complex, not just a memory, but a web of belief, emotion, myth, and trauma, animated by the archetype it has fused with. It is why one person's betrayal births in you the shame of every exile, why one disapproving glance can collapse your whole being into a frozen child again. The past speaks through symbol, and it does not whisper. The abuser activates the inner judge. The cold parent stirs the orphan. The manipulator arouses the martyr. The servant, the shadow. You begin to inhabit these energies, not as choice, but as compulsion. You live beneath their decree. You shrink when unseen hands tighten around your joy. You apologize for your light. You flinch from your own voice. And yet something in you begins to stir, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. You begin to hear another voice, not loud, but ancient, not new, but long forgotten. It is the voice of the sovereign, the archetype of the inner ruler who bows to no outer god, the one who remembers your name before it was renamed by trauma, the one who says, "This does not belong to me." And that moment is sacred. It is not rage, it is resurrection. It is not defiance, it is return. The soul does not awaken by ease, but by friction. A sacred unrest begins to ripple within the dream. Many act free, few are free. We speak in liberation's tongue, yet move like those still walking the halls of the prison. The doors may stand open, but we tiptoe still, afraid of the creak in the floor, of laughter too loud, of tears too visible. We dress our joy in muted colors, lest it summon wrath. We hold our breath in moments meant for exhale, but the soul has grown tired of hiding. One day you laugh, And the laughter is not obedient. It erupts from a place untouched by rules. One day you are spoken to in the old, familiar tone of manipulation, and instead of contracting, you watch curious, unmoved. That is no small thing. That is your nervous system remembering a different script. That is your psyche rehearsing a new myth. That is the child within you unbolting the cellar door. But here the ego panics, for it has built its temple upon your wounding. It has crafted its identity around being hurt. And to let go of the pain feels like death. It asks if I am no longer the victim. Who will I be? Who will listen? What will remain? The ego does not desire healing. It desires continuation. It would rather be seen in suffering than disappear into wholeness. And so the old myth is rehearsed again. The pain is performed. The roles are reprised. Yet there is another way. A way that does not deny the past, but no longer feeds it. Not all chains are shattered in battle, some dissolve in presence. When you no longer perform the story, when you stop offering your life as evidence of your own undoing, the complex withers, not because it was not real, but because it is no longer sovereign. This is not denial, it is alchemy. Healing is not retelling, it is reclaiming. You do not heal by analyzing the wound until it bleeds anew. You heal by integrating it into your mythos, letting it be part of the constellation of who you are, no longer God, no longer tyrant, simply a star in the sky of your becoming. A woman once shared her dream she was alone on a stage, performing with great intensity, but the audience was empty. She danced and wept and collapsed into the movements. When I asked her why, she said, "I've rehearsed this so long. I don't know how to stop." And I told her, then the performance itself is the prison. You see, we are cast into roles before we have language. The quiet one, the scapegoat, the golden child, the healer, the burden. These identities are not who we are. They are garments placed on us by others. But we wore them until they melded with our skin. We lived their myth, and it is terrifying to remove them, to stand without a script. But only then can the true self, the one untouched by performance, begin to speak. And so, beloved soul, wanderer, if these words echo in the hollow of your being, let them be a bell. Let them toll for the roles you now shed, for the stage you now step down from. Let them call you back into the temple of your own breath. You are not here to perform. You are here to be. Now, if your spirit stirred and symbols awakened in your bones, let us complete this rite together. In the sacred numerology of the inner journey, every number holds a whisper, a vibration, a key. In the mythic world, 7 is the number of integration, of wholeness, of stepping beyond illusion into vision. It is the number of the hermit's lantern, of the seeker's spiral, of the soul finally circling back to its source with wisdom gleaned from descent. If you felt something shift, even subtly, even momentarily, I invite you now. I beckon you to comment the number 7 below. Let it be your silent offering to the unseen forces guiding you. Let it be your way of saying, I remember, I return, I reclaim. Let the ritual continue. You are not a part to be played. You are the whole theater, the backstage, the light, the velvet curtains, the silence before the first line. And when you realize this, something in you expands beyond the control of any person, memory, or label. Even now, as I speak these words, I can sense something stirring in you. A heat, a recognition. Perhaps it feels like tears behind the eyes or a loosening in the chest. That is not emotion. That is a self-reclaiming territory. That is the divine archetype of freedom whispering into the chambers of your being. You have already won. Not because the pain didn't happen, but because it no longer defines you. Not because you forget, but because you remember who you are beyond what was done to you. There is a point in every soul's journey where the wound transforms into wisdom, where the story becomes the seed and not the script. And it is in this holy transfiguration that we begin to walk not as wounded nor as warriors, but as witnesses. We see it all. We carry the scar not as proof of defeat, but as the mark of metamorphosis. And no captor can undo that. Let us pause here, not in silence, but in sacred stillness. What in you is ready to breathe without permission? What part of your voice is clearing its throat? What version of you is waiting for the script to burn? You think they still control you, but the truth is you're standing in the ruins of their throne room, and the walls that once held you tremble at your footsteps. In dreams, this victory often appears long before the ego catches up. A woman may dream of walking barefoot through a battlefield, not fleeing, not hiding, just walking, untouched, though arrows fall all around. Or a man may find himself in an abandoned cathedral, sweeping ashes from the altar, and as he cleans, he weeps. But the weeping is not sorrow. It is a kind of baptism. These are not just symbols. These are psychic truths emerging in symbolic form. They are the soul's way of whispering. The war is over, but you must dare to live as if peace is possible. We must not underestimate the inertia of pain. The human psyche, when shaped for too long by chaos, becomes allergic to peace. Calm. Fear is suspicious. Stillness feels like the prelude to an attack. You may even sabotage the very serenity you prayed for, simply because its frequency is foreign. The jailer has left, but you've grown used to pacing the cell. This is where the archetype of the saboteur must be faced, not as enemy, but as misunderstood guardian. Yes, the saboteur is part of you. It was born to protect you from false hope. It saw you shattered by betrayal and decided, I will destroy anything that looks like love before it has a chance to betray us again. It burns bridges, not out of malice, but out of memory. It poisons potential, not because you are unworthy, but because once you believed someone who told you that you were, so it remains on guard, attacking anything that resembles risk. But listen closely. The saboteur is tired. It is not evil. It is exhausted. It has stood at the gates of your soul for years, sword drawn, fending off ghosts. And now that you are awakening, you do not need to exile it. You need to retire it with honor. You say to this part of yourself, thank you for keeping me alive, but I'm not surviving anymore. I'm ready to live. This inner ritual, this dethroning of control, this honoring of the old defense systems is not abstract work. It is deeply embodied. You feel it in the shoulders, unclenching, in the breath, deepening, in the spontaneous laughter that erupts when no one is watching. You notice it when you no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You feel it when you walk away, not out of anger, but from clarity. The true sign you've already won is that you no longer argue with ghosts. There's no need to convince a projection. There's no need to reopen the courtroom of your past and plead your case before the same old judges. You realize the verdict they gave was never binding. It was only binding as long as you believed it. But belief is not immutable. It bends, it breaks, it reforms. This is why I speak often of the self, not the ego, not the persona, not the conditioned voice of the superego, but the radiant nucleus of your being. The self is not a product of approval. It is not shaped by applause. It does not rise and fall with someone else's perception. It simply is. And when you touch it, if only for a moment, it becomes impossible to return fully to the old ways of submission. The self is not a concept. It is a frequency. And once you hear its resonance, every lie begins to sound off-key. The old manipulations don't seduce you anymore. The shame doesn't stick. The fear shrinks under your gaze. You realize you've changed, not because you made a declaration, but because your nervous system no longer flinches where it used to. The same words that once pierced you now dissolve mid-air. You don't need revenge. You don't need recognition. You need only to walk on unshackled. And now let us descend into a deeper mystery. The paradox of control is that it often persists most strongly through your resistance to it. Whatever you resist, you feed. Whatever you fear, you energize. Whatever you try to escape, you carry. So many fight their past as if it is a beast to be slain. But in doing so, they bind themselves to it. Imagine a man dragging a chain behind him, cursing it with every step. He may think he is fighting it, but in truth, he is ensuring it never leaves. The more you define yourself against something, the more you tether yourself to its gravity. But liberation does not come from opposition. It comes from transcendence. You must rise above the pattern, not wrestle within it. This is the essence of psychic individuation, the sacred journey of becoming who you were before the world told you who to be. Not by rejecting everything, but by integrating it. You do not need to erase your history to heal. You need only to walk with it differently. Carry the story, but change its ending. Let the villain become the catalyst. Let the wound become the womb. Do you understand what once broke? You may have broken something that needed to die. Not your worth, but your submission. Not your voice, but your silence. What you thought was your destruction was, perhaps, your deliverance in disguise. And now, perhaps, you dream differently. You do not dream of being saved, but of remembering your own name. You do not long for rescue, but for revelation. You stop waiting for apologies that will never come. You stop hoping the past will become fair. You let go of the fantasy that the ones who hurt you will ever see what they did. And in doing so, you reclaim the power they still held through your waiting. Do you see how powerful that is? Forgiveness is not a pardon. It is a declaration of ownership. You are saying, I will not let your story write mine anymore. That is not weakness. That is divine authorship. And still, the shadows whisper. They ask, but what if they return? What if they hurt you again? What if you're still vulnerable? And here, the final veil begins to lift. Because the goal was never to become untouchable. The goal was to become unshakable. Not because harm no longer exists, but because you are no longer shaped by fear. You can be kind without being controlled. You can be open without being exploited. You can be soft without being swallowed. This is the true mystery of power. It does not armor itself. It emanates. It does not conquer. It attracts. It does not perform. It simply is a now. I want you to feel what this sermon is truly about. It is not about proof. It is about presence. You do not need to prove that you've won. You simply need to notice how you no longer respond the way you used to. You no longer chase validation. You no longer beg for closure. You no longer shrink in the presence of intimidation. You no longer tolerate what once felt inevitable. You no longer play small to keep the peace. And in all these subtle shifts, your liberation is quietly blooming. It's not a trumpet blast. It's a soul returning to its natural pitch. Even though as you sit, as you breathe, something is realigning. You are not being healed. You are remembering that you already are. The illusion was that control ever truly belonged to them. The truth is, it was always your light they feared, and now you no longer dim it. We arrive now at the riverbank of your inner world, where the waters are no longer muddied by fear, where the reflection that once frightened you with distortions now shows you not who you were told you are, but who you've always been. There is a quietness here that only the self can create. It is not the quiet of suppression, nor the silence of defeat. It is the sacred hush of sovereignty. You begin to notice that when you speak now, you do not seek permission in your own tone. Your voice no longer curls at the edges, hoping not to offend. It resounds from the depths, not to impress, not to manipulate, but to simply be. And that, perhaps, is the most threatening thing to those who once sought to control you. That you no longer need their disapproval to define yourself, nor their approval to justify you becoming. The psyche is wise in its unfolding. It will not give you what you are not ready to integrate. That is why your healing did not come all at once. It was like dawn, slow, deliberate, first in shadows, then in light. The soul knows how to protect itself from a healing that would be too bright, too sudden, so it gives you symbols, dreams, flickers, reminders that victory is not a single act, but a way of being. I once spoke to a man who dreamed every night of a lion pacing behind a glass wall. He stood before it, afraid, and yet the glass always held. One day I asked him, "Have you noticed that the lion never breaks through?" He nodded. "And have you noticed that you never turn away again? Again?" He nodded. "Then, perhaps the dream is not about threat," I said, "but about your readiness to face what once terrified you." That night, he dreamed the glass disappeared and the lion lay at his feet, purring. This is what happens when your inner persecutor loses its power. The archetype that once dominated your dreams becomes a companion, not because it has changed, but because the threat was never the lion. It was your fear of your own strength. And now, in your waking life, the same pattern is beginning. The people who once paralyzed you with a glance, the memories that once hijacked your mood, the voices that lift like static in the background of your mind, they grow quieter. Not because they vanished, but because you no longer vibrate at their frequency. This is the principle of resonance. Just as a piano string does not echo a note unless it matches its own tuning, your nervous system no longer echoes the trauma once held within it. It recognizes dissonance now. It rejects it not with anger, but with clarity. You walk into a room and immediately sense, this energy is not mine. You enter a conversation and feel the tug of guilt, but you do not bite the hook. You hear an old insult and it lands flat as if spoken in a language your soul no longer speaks. This is psychic maturity. It is not perfection. It is not invulnerability. It is discernment without fear, boundaries without bitterness, presence without apology. And it is, perhaps, the clearest sign that you have already won. You no longer define yourself by what you survived. You carry the scar. Yes, but you do not introduce yourself with it. You do not seek compensation through pity. You do not try to prove you are healed. You are simply too busy living. There is a holy audacity in that. It is the audacity to celebrate yourself without waiting for someone to deem you worthy. It is the audacity to rest without guilt, to say no without needing a reason, to love yourself fiercely in the face of those who told you it was selfish, to outgrow roles that once felt like home, but were actually cages carved in the shape of approval. You may feel guilty at first. That is normal. The psyche, conditioned by years of internalized control, interprets expansion as betrayal. But hear me. You are not betraying them by freeing yourself. You are betraying your soul. If you don't, the parts of you that long to be chosen, protected, adored, they will mourn. They will grieve that those who should have held you never did. And in that grief, a great portal opens because once you stop waiting for them to change, you are free to change your life. There is a subtle but vital shift that occurs when you stop making your healing about them. Many stay stuck because they are still proving something to the people who broke them. Look at me now. They shout into the void, "See what you lost, see what you did." But the void does not answer. It only echoes, and the soul grows weary of screaming into a silence that cannot hear. But when you shift, when you say, "I no longer need to be seen by you to see myself," you reclaim your eyes. You see yourself as you are, not through the lens of the projection. You become subject, not object. You write a story. You do not await the edit. And something beautiful happens then. You find that you no longer need closure because you are no longer closing yourself around them. You are opening to something larger, something sacred. You find that you no longer need apologies to forgive because forgiveness is no longer a transaction. It is liberation. You do not free them. You free yourself from the gravitational pull of resentment. You find that you no longer brace for impact in every conversation. You no longer monitor your expression like a diplomat in enemy territory. You smile because you feel joy, not because you seek permission. You frown because something hurt, not because you owe an explanation. This is not the absence of pain. This is the presence of sovereignty. And, oh, how long your soul has waited for this. Do you remember Evan Vogel? What it felt like to belong to yourself before they made you feel too much, too loud, too quiet, too needy, too distant, too intense. That memory is not lost. It is encoded in your very being, waiting to be reawakened, not by logic, not by lectures, but by living as if you are already whole. The archetype of the orphan gives way to the archetype of the sage. The child, once abandoned, grows into the visionary. The lover, once shamed, returns as a beloved. You are not pieces of a broken past. You are the portal through which all things are redeemed. So let us not pretend you are merely healing. You are rising. You are remembering. You are already beyond the prison. But the part of you that was locked inside still needs to be found, still needs to be held, still needs to be told. It is safe now. You may come out. The war is over. There will be days when you forget. There will be echoes that catch you off guard. All triggers will flash like lightning through a clear sky. Do not shame yourself. Do not regress into self-condemnation. Simply return. Place your hand on your heart and say, "I'm here now. I'm with you." That is how you become your own liberator. They think they still control you, but the moment you stop performing, the spell breaks. The moment you see your reflection and no longer flinch, the enchantment ends. The moment you laugh without shame, speak without shrinking, and love without bargaining, you have already won. There is a moment when the alchemist places the vessel upon the flame not to destroy it, but to purify what lies within. You are that vessel. Life has been the flame, and now, after all that boiling, breaking, and evaporating, something golden is settling at the bottom, not because you escaped suffering, but because you allowed it to transform you. That is the philosopher's stone of the soul, the ability to hold your own depth without needing to be saved from it. You no longer look for gods in other people. You do not hand over your divinity in exchange for belonging. You do not let others define you in the language of their own wounds. Instead, you carry your light, not as a banner, but as a quiet frequency. It does not seek to convince. It simply changes the temperature of every room you walk into. And now I must tell you something sacred, something few are ready to hear. Though your soul has long suspected it, the final sign that they no longer control you is that you can bless them. Not in the superficial sense of forced forgiveness, not in the tone of spiritual superiority, but in the deep, alchemical way that only someone who has been through hell and returned with vision can do. You bless them, not because they deserve it. You bless them because you do. Because bitterness is too expensive. Because vengeance keeps the tether alive. because carrying poison in your bloodstream does not punish the one who poured it, because you have better things to do with your life force than keep it chained to the past. You bless them because you are no longer living in reaction. You are living from source, and perhaps you bless them quietly, a whisper in the wind, a letting go. You do not send the blessing to change them, but to release yourself. You say, I return this energy to where it belongs. I do not need it anymore. I choose peace, not because it was offered, but because I found it within. In this blessing, you stop the pattern from passing to the next soul. You become the break in the chain, the ancestral shift, the unseen miracle. Others may never know the battle you fought just to stand here in your own skin, breathing your own breath, speaking your own truth. But the psyche knows. The unconscious rejoices. The archetypes rearrange themselves in celebration. You are not meant to carry this pain forever. You are meant to transmute it. You are not meant to relive the story. You are meant to rewrite it. You are not meant to stay small to keep them comfortable. You are meant to expand until their definition of you no longer fits. And now, you no longer ask, what will they think? But what do I feel? You no longer seek signs that it's safe to be yourself. You simply are. You no longer plead with shadows to love you. You sit in the light you've built. And those who are meant to meet you there will find their way without force. This is the essence of individuation. It is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of remembrance, a returning to the divine design you came here with before the world taught you to edit yourself. You become the dream walking, the symbol realized, the pattern broken, and still you do not boast, you do not shout, you do not need to. Your peace becomes its own proof. Your joy becomes its own protection. Your radiance becomes its own revolution. Yes, there will be those who resent your wholeness. They will try again to provoke the old you, to summon your defensiveness, your guilt, your shame. But they will find no entry point. You are sealed by truth. You are no longer performing for ghosts. Even the ghosts will fade. Eventually, you walk into the mirror, now, and you do not apologize. You meet your own eyes and see someone who stayed when it would have been easier to disappear. You see someone who faced the shame, the silence, the storm, and did not close. You see someone who kept loving, not because love was returned, but because it was your nature all along. That is the ultimate liberation. Not power over others, not immunity from pain, but fidelity to your own soul, regardless of how the world responds. There is no drama in it, no climax, no final confrontation where you finally say the perfect words and they realize everything. No, that is fantasy. The reality is far more quiet and far more powerful. You just stop waiting. You stop asking. You stop seeking someone else's permission to be whole. You rise without ceremony. You laugh for no reason. You cry without collapsing. You rest without guilt. You speak without trembling. You love without chasing. You walk without fearing who might follow. You belong to yourself. Not in pieces, but as one. And from this place, you build a new life. A life not constructed from old blueprints, but from the deep blueprint of your own knowing. You gather relationships that reflect your expansion, not your trauma. You choose work that aligns with your values, not your wounds. You protect your energy, a sacred currency. You speak in ways that open, not in ways that bind. And when you fall, and you do not shame yourself, you bless the ground. You rise again. You understand that. Even in your forgetting, the soul remembers. You understand that even when the old pain resurfaces, it is not regression. It is deepening. And so, here you are, no longer asking if they still control you, because the question has dissolved, because there is no they in your temple anymore. Only the presence of the self, still sovereign, unshaken. You are not the storm. You are the sky it passes through. You are not the script. You are the writer. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to become, despite it. So breathe, not like someone who escaped, but like someone who has returned. Returned to the place in you that was never touched by control, only temporarily hidden. Return to the fire that was dimmed, but never extinguished. Return to the vastness that no label, no judgment, no memory could ever hold. You think they still control you, but listen, you are not even on the same frequency anymore. You are not just free. You are free enough to bless the chains that once held you, because they no longer fit, because you no longer shrink, because you already won.